This week, South Africans from all walks of life joining the world in mourning the passing of Jesse Jackson, a preacher, activist and global voice for justice whose impact reached far beyond the United States. During the darkest days of apartheid, when oppression was law and isolation was policy, he stood firmly with the people of this country. He amplified the call for sanctions, mobilized international pressure and built a meaningful bond with leaders such as Nelson Mandela. He understood that solidarity is not symbolic, it is moral action. In fact, let's go straight to the reflections of Rev Frank Chikane, who joins me now. Struggle veteran, pastor, and of course, a moral voice in his own right in our democracy. Reverend, good afternoon. It's good to see you. Let me start with your own reflections upon hearing the news of the passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Well, I mean, indeed, it's a great loss, but those who knew him would know that he was not well. And therefore, I was not surprised when I got the news. But you know, the best way to really remember him is really about his contribution he has made. He has made a great contribution, supported us during the worst time of our struggle, accompanied us, called for sanctions. When we called for sanctions, supported that call, participated in the anti-apartheid movement in the United States to push for the anti-apartheid bill, which the President of the United States did not want at that time, but it was adopted by Congress. He vetoed it, and they worked with Congress to reverse that decision. And so I would say that Jesse Jackson is one of the great leaders who assisted us during the struggle. But he wasn't just fighting for the liberation of South Africa against apartheid, he was also fighting against human rights violations in his own country and challenged it at all costs, and also tried to even stand for presidency, hoping that if he became president, he would be able to change the US system. But as you would know, he did not succeed the two times that he tried to be president, but we really honor him for the contribution he made to support us to get rid of apartheid. Yeah.
I imagine, Mfundisi, that you will have had quite a number of encounters with him. Just share with us some of those memories that you have.
Yeah, you know, he came about 3 times to South Africa besides meeting him in the United States when we are visiting. And the first time he came here during the apartheid days, I really technically hosted him because the South African Council of Churches was the only voice that was not silenced in the country. You remember at one stage, it's not just the banning of liberation movements, but it was restricting even the trade union movements. They couldn't even call for a strike at that moment. And Jesse Jackson came during that time and we hosted him, and he made a huge impact. And then, of course, when Mandela was released, he made sure he was here. And he was with us when we went to fetch Mandela from Victor Verster. In fact, he nearly got crushed by the crowds there trying to find Mandela and thought the car in which he was where Mandela is. So he was there at the right time. And he also visited us during the time we had been free. In all those instances, he was here to support the people of South Africa against the apartheid system.
Yeah. I'd like you to talk to the ideological clarity and the, theological clarity, ideological, theological, ecumenical clarity that it took to understand and cut through the noise and clutter at the time, the 70s, the 80s, when anti-ANC anti-communist rhetoric was quite strong and powerful and being utilized in the United States. I always say that I've got a particular respect for people in the United States at that time in particular who had that clarity to understand what the situation in South Africa was, because it wasn't easy, was it? You were pushing back against a whole lot of forces.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, but Jesse Jackson came from a tradition which was opposing human rights violations in the United States. The United States was anti-communist, but you can't be anti-communist and then practice oppressive behavior against other people. And he was there when Martin Luther King was killed, assassinated. And so he was part of the leadership that was critical about the United States, its position against communism, because they could read in between that they're using communism for really perpetrating unjust actions against their own people. And he was part of the generation that reflected on liberation theology, where we also were able to separate issues about communism and apartheid. I mean, I always say in this country, I was part of the church leadership, and the first people who really had dinner with me, whites, were communists.
Yeah.
They were not Christians. And so we had a position that was very firm, and he took that position. It was risky for him to take that position, but he did.
All right, Reverend Frank Chikane, I've got to thank you for paying tribute to the late Reverend Jesse Jackson.